Well, hey there, and welcome to Wedding Planning Simplified. It is July, or at least it's almost July, and we are joining you today to talk about how to beat the heat here in Southern Ontario, where we have two seasons, winter and the surface of the sun. Is it pretty hot outside right now? Yeah. This is my co host, Presley, and she's joining us today to help us talk about how to stay cool during your wedding party photos, right? Mm-hmm. So, if you are planning a wedding in the near future in any location where it may be kind of warm, you will know that, or hopefully you will know that you will need to keep your wedding party comfortable during the photo shoot. And this is something that we are definitely starting to experience. We had a few weddings this weekend, and it was quite a warm one here in London. So we had some very with it couples who had really planned on ways to keep their wedding parties cool. We don't want anybody passing out during those photos and just kind of keeping their comfort in mind. So throughout July, we're going to be talking about guest comfort and how to make sure that everybody stays nice and cool and comfortable during those heat waves that we experience here in London in the summer. Of course, if you're anywhere else, you probably have different weather at different times of the year, but here in London, it is warm outside right now. So, we would like to address the photo part of the day. And there are, of course, a million things that play into the timing of your photography. We always advise you, wherever you possibly can, to think about your wedding photography and consult with your professionals before you make any kind of scheduling decisions. So if you're working with a professional photographer, perhaps a videographer, you'll want to have a really open conversation with them about the timing of the day and when it's the optimal time to take photos before you really set anything in stone. There are so many things that play into the timing of the ceremony and the timing of the photos, and you'll want to make sure that you think about those things before you really cement that itinerary. But if you're doing a first look, oftentimes what that means is that you're doing your wedding party photos before the ceremony, which might be later in the afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock. And sometimes that means that you're doing those wedding party photos at the peak of the heat in the day between, noon and 3 p.m. And those are things that you want to talk to your photographer about, because if it is a hot, sunny day, it's really not an optimal time to take photos because the sun is really quite direct. And I certainly don't know anything about photography, but I do know that harsh sun is often really not your friend when it comes to those photos. And so talk to your photographer, talk to your videographer, and you'll want to really think pretty closely about a few things. So we'll talk about timing, we'll talk about location, we'll talk about hydration, and then we're going to kind of talk about other things to think about. So with regard to your photography, oftentimes what you'll do is start out with the two of you as a couple and then bring in your wedding party, whether that happens before the ceremony or after the ceremony. It depends on the timing of your day, but you'll want to think about how direct the sun is going to be and how hot it's likely to be when you're doing those formal photos, so that you're not putting anybody in danger of overheating or of heat stroke or dehydration or anything like that, but also so that it's optimal for the photography and videography crews to capture the best possible photos of you. So what you might think about doing is moving your ceremony later in the day. And regardless of whether you're doing first look photography or whether you're doing all of your photography in between the ceremony and the reception, what that hopefully does is allows you to take your photos a little bit later rather, when the sun isn't quite as intense. Now, it's also potentially a benefit to any guests who might be checking into a hotel or who might be traveling long distances if you do have a little bit later ceremony. But we also recognize that sometimes your hands are tied by the location where you're having your ceremony. For instance, I work at a number of churches that have designated times for ceremonies that are earlier in the day so that they can accommodate multiple ceremonies on one day. Or there's a hotel here in town where we often do ceremonies, and they're in an atrium where there's actually a pool that's open to the hotel guests. So they vary they very much specify the times when you can have your ceremony so that they can close down the pool accordingly. So if you're working with a venue where your ceremony time is prescribed, you might not have a lot of say. But if you are getting married in the heat of summer, or what's likely to be the heat of summer, and you have the ability to do it, think about moving your ceremony a little bit later so that hopefully your photos aren't happening right at that really strong sunlight, very high heat part of the day. The second thing to think about is the location of your photos. And this is something that my couple yesterday did a really great job of. And I have to give a shout out to Nicole and Corey. I'm sure you're not watching. I hope you're not, because it's the day after your wedding. I hope you're sitting back and relaxing. But they did a really, really phenomenal job of thinking very carefully about the locations that they chose for their wedding party and their family photography so that nobody got overheated. So they were working here at the Western University in London, which is a really old university with lots of beautiful buildings and gorgeous architecture. And one of the benefits to choosing a location like that, a university or a college campus that has beautiful buildings, but also potentially lots of old growth trees, is that you can choose locations for your photography where you're hopefully mostly shaded, whether that's under an overhang or in the sort of doorway of a building. You'll want to make sure that you're scouting out locations well in advance of your wedding day, and that you're scouting out those locations at the same time as you're going to be doing your photos. So the week or 2 weeks before your wedding, head out at the same time that your photos are scheduled for, and go to the locations you're thinking about. Check where the sun is, check where the shadows are, and it's going to be a pretty close approximation of what that will look like on your wedding day. So hopefully you can choose locations where there are lots of trees, lots of shade, lots of architectural overhangs or passageways or whatever you're working with, so that hopefully you can keep a lot of your photography in the shade. And that will also be beneficial to your photographer in the case that they're not fighting with harsh sunlight right on your face. Now, you could also think about indoor locations for a lot of your photography, depending on where your ceremony and reception are being held. If it's a beautiful indoor location, maybe that's an option for the majority of your photography. But we generally recommend that you try to look for locations that are naturally cool, shady, or resulting in architectural shading, so that you can have hopefully a more comfortable wedding party. And you can also help them by thinking about hydration. This is another really great thing that my wedding party did yesterday. They had coolers of non-alcoholic beverages, lots and lots and lots of water. They had some pop, they had some juice, they had some energy drinks. It's a long day on your wedding day. But they took those coolers with them in the limo to their photo locations, and they made sure that those drinks were readily accessible so that at any point anybody wanted an ice cold bottle of water, it was there, and they didn't have to wait. They didn't have to send someone out to get it. They didn't have to go without water, because hydration is so important. Oftentimes your wedding day will start really early. So if you are getting ready from early in the morning, make sure that you're hydrating throughout the time prior to your wedding. You also want to make sure that you're hydrating throughout those photos and after the photos. It can go by so quickly, and you can realize that you haven't had a drink of water in hours and hours. So making sure that it's always readily accessible is going to help you to stay hydrated and to combat potential heat stroke or dehydration during the heat of the day, if that's when you are taking your photos. You also want to make sure that you've eaten before the photo time. It can be an exciting day. It can be a very emotional day, and sometimes people feel that they don't want to eat during that time. But making sure that you have had some nourishment in the morning is going to help you to combat any potential nausea or any lightheadedness that you might experience if it is a really hot time during that photo session. So first and foremost, hydrate, but also make sure that you've had adequate nutrition in the morning. Then just some other things to think about. If you are booking a limo or any kind of transportation for yourself and the wedding party to go to and from photos, or to travel between ceremony and reception location, make sure that you're booking with a reputable limo company that's going to have a newer fleet of of actual limos and cars and vehicles so that they have air conditioning systems that work. Oftentimes, we see couples booking with more affordable companies who have older fleets. And the unfortunate reality of that is that sometimes those AC units just aren't as well equipped to keep up with the heat as they may have been in a newer vehicle. So make sure that you're booking transportation that has a working and adequate air conditioning system. If you're thinking about traveling around on a school bus, oftentimes they don't have AC. So that's something to think about. It's affordable, but are you willing to give up the comfort of a climate controlled vehicle to save the money on maybe an older limo whose air conditioning isn't working, or a school bus that doesn't have an AC system? You might want to think about also carrying a spray bottle or an atomizer of water with you. Now, any makeup and hair artists who are listening, don't worry, I'm not suggesting that you mist your face or your hair, because we want to think about maintaining the hair and makeup that you presumably have worked pretty hard on. But misting the back of your neck or misting the back of your knees with a spray bottle of water can actually be a really good way to provide some relief from the heat. You might want to think about packing some damp towels or washcloths in that cooler so that if someone does get overheated, they can put one on the back of their neck. So little tricks like that can help to keep a little bit cooler in very hot conditions. And generally just forethought and sort of walking through the situation a couple of weeks before are the most important things you can do when you're thinking about those wedding party and family photographs, which often happen either right before or right after the ceremony. So if you can, slide the time of the ceremony a little bit later in the day so that hopefully you're dealing with cooler temperatures. Think about location. Try to find shady or overhung locations if you're doing outdoor photography, or air-conditioned indoor locations. And then think about bringing lots of hydration for yourself, the wedding party, and family. Think about packing a little spray bottle of water, maybe a little battery-powered fan, and think about making sure that you have all of those things accessible to your wedding party so that you can all stay nice and cool on the wedding day during the photography session. And then the final thing is, make sure that when you're scheduling your photos, you have enough time for your wedding party to cool down and freshen up before the ceremony. Don't schedule your wedding party photography so close to the ceremony that you go straight from the end of photos into the processional. You'll want to make sure that you have a space that's nice and cool where you can go to the washroom, blot your face, maybe have a nice drink of water, and make sure that you have time to cool down and relax before that ceremony time. So thank you, as always, for joining us here on this warm Sunday at the end of June. We are tackling, as I mentioned, throughout July, climate control and comfort issues. So please join us next week as we talk about that. My co-host came back. Hello.
Hello.
Do you have anything you'd like to say? No. Okay. So from Presley and I here at Unmistakably You, we want to encourage you to have an amazing, incredible wedding. Keep joining us here. And if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us, Amy at unmistakably.you.com, or you can shoot us a message here. And we want to hear all about your wedding. Take care. Enjoy your day. Bye.